Hi, I'm Clara.
And I'm Stephanie.
Welcome to the Practice with Clara podcast, where we go into philosophy and all things yoga related, which we love talking about.
This week's theme is community.
We talk about our teachers, who inspires us,
and how to stay connected during this time to a global community.
If you haven't already, subscribe to the podcast. Enjoy today's episode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Practice with Clara podcast. You're joining Stephanie
and Clara
for this week's theme on community. I'm going to hand it over to Clara, who's going to start us off with a grounding meditation.
So, if you can, find a seat of your choice and close those beautiful eyes of yours. And again, if closing the eyes ever feels like too much, you can always just have your eyes cast down at a half gaze. And just take a couple of deep breaths, allowing yourself to arrive in the here and now. Community translates in Sanskrit as Sangha or Kula. And if you look up those words, the actual definition is a loving or like-minded community of people who come together. And so our Sangha, our Kula, are the people in our lives who are either on the path with us or inspire us to walk our path, or support us as we walk our path. So just take a couple of breaths and think of the people in your life who support you so that you can do what you do. Think of the people in your life who inspire you by what they're doing. And then think of your peers, people who are walking this path with you. Sometimes we feel very alone, especially on the spiritual path or the path of seeking our own truth. And so this meditation is a sweet reminder that there are people around you who are supporting, loving, and challenging you to be the best being that you are, or to be the best being that you can be. And slowly opening your eyes. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us today to discuss one of my favorite topics, which is community. It's the reason why I teach yoga. And the reason why Steph and I are doing this is to build more community.
So I thought I'd start reading a quote out of a book by Jack Kornfield, inspired by Clara. Some teachers are rascals and coyotes who trick and surprise their students. Some are harsh task makers trying to whittle down ego and pride. Others teach more through honoring and encouragement, nurturing the best in a student. Some teachers lecture like a professor. Others can melt us open with their love and compassion. The greatest and simplest power of a teacher is the environment of their own freedom and joy.
Why did you choose that?
So I selected this quote just in how it really gives a lot of ways that we learn. It really expresses all the different teachers in our lives. And I feel, personally, a lot of my teachers have come through my adversaries. It isn't necessarily people that I feel a strong like to, but I learn a lot of myself in just my interaction with them. So I love this because it shows the trickster, the one who's challenging your ego, the one who lectures through compassion. And the last line in environment, it's the environment they create and cultivate, and you draw your students into that environment, which, Clara, you inspired this book. So depending on how you teach, that's going to influence who your students become. And then not necessarily in terms of your adversary, but if you're inspired by someone, you're a part of that community. And like the meditation we just did, the like-mindedness of these spiritual beings coming into the same space and having the same values.
Yeah. I want to go back, though, to the adversaries. I thought that was very good.
Yeah.
And it's one that we don't generally talk about. So I love that you picked this quote for this reason. And so I'd love you to, if you can, to speak to an example. You don't have to give the actual story, but like an example of a teacher that was an adversary for you.
So two come up right off the bat. One was a professor in university who was very hard on me. It was my first and only D, which just hit me hard here. I'm an A student. It drove me absolutely crazy. But he picked apart, he was so critical, and this class stands out. I learned the most from him in having to find my voice and stand up for, this is why I put this in this essay, this is why I said this way. So finding my voice against him really helped me cultivate, well, this is my idea against his, which you don't get when you share all the same values with someone. Is if you're not disagreeing, you're not necessarily standing in what you believe when you're just sharing all of the same opinions. The other person was my boss, someone I worked for, and he drove me absolutely crazy. It was very hard to be in a space with him, but...
Why did he drive you crazy?
I felt he was a little bit domineering and aggressive, and I felt like I had to make myself really small in order to work with him, that my ideas weren't necessarily received. And when I don't feel received, I get smaller. Like I literally...
And so what did you learn from that experience?
Different communication tactics to be received. So all of a sudden in our interactions, I had to shift my communication style, and sometimes it wasn't even verbal, just even body language, and trying to open up and get into a space with him where he would receive me. I learned a lot through that, and understanding different communication styles with people.
I find that with adversaries or people who challenge us in our life, what is reflected back to us is where we are lacking or a part of ourselves that we don't like, right? Generally, the adversary could also be the person that reflects back to us an aspect of ourselves that we don't like or where we are lacking. And so I think some of the greatest teachers are the people who challenge us because they're the ones who literally reflect back to us, oh, this isn't working. And so I love that you just said you had to learn new communication tactics, because if you always do hang out with like-minded people, then you don't have to grow in terms of communication and stuff like that, because you guys speak the same language, you understand each other. So I find it really actually very inspiring and important to work with people that you wouldn't necessarily work with. So put yourself into a situation with a group of people that you wouldn't necessarily choose to. And so one of those places could be a work environment or school, something that you're not necessarily choosing for yourself, but that you are putting yourself in to learn.
And I think another space that, it's not super impacted in my family, but having family members where you don't have the same political or environmental views, and you're having to be in this shared space with people you love and want relationship with, but maybe you don't necessarily agree. There's a huge ability to learn and evolve how you're approaching situations in that.
And along with that, just to build on that, when we kind of talked about it, I feel like at the beginning of COVID is this idea of, can I also surround myself with people that I don't necessarily have the same opinion with? Can I respect their opinion as well as hold my own? Yeah. And I find that especially the further down your own spiritual path you go, all of a sudden what can happen, and I see this with a lot of people, I've definitely gone through it myself, is all of a sudden you become a bit more dogmatic and you're like, well, if you're not doing X, Y, and Z, then you're not a good person, or you're not, you're not like walking down the right spiritual path. So I find that, at least for myself, I like and want to have people in my life who challenge me in that way, so that can I have a conversation with a Trump supporter?
Yeah, that's
or like something along those lines, and see and recognize them as a full human, not as somebody that is less than. And again, that's part of, I feel like, being part of a larger community is to love and respect people who don't necessarily hold the same values as you.
And who would your I guess adversarial teachers be? Anyone come to mind, or any instance?
I think, just kind of riffing on what you had talked about, the one that comes to mind is, I remember I was in university and I was taking a course, a film course, and the teacher was definitely misogynistic, meaning he didn't love women. And you could tell just by the way that he treated whoever spoke. And a lot of people in the class chose, and it was like half women, half men in this film course, and most of the women just stopped speaking. And it actually challenged me that I was like, I'm going to speak even more.
So good.
Yeah, that's the trickster in me. And I felt like even with every rejection of whatever it is that I said, fueled me to talk even more, and to stand in and be okay with somebody not necessarily saying, like, I'm used to being, I'm the same, I'm a very good student, I'm generally liked by my teachers, and so to have this teacher very strongly dislike me, and for me to be okay with it. So that was like the greatest gift of that, is like, I don't need his approval in order to be able to say what I want to say, and to think that I am worth my speech or whatever it is that I'm saying. So I felt like that was a great gift. It was a good one for me to learn for myself, is like, I don't need the approval of others. I mean, I'm still obviously always working with that one, but that was like a great teacher. And then another one that I've found is, I think the other one that comes to mind is actually a yoga teacher that I really respected, and who didn't feel the same way about me, let's just say. But I still respected what they were doing as a teacher. And I remember really struggling with that as their student, is like, the way I could tell that they didn't respect what I did, but I really respected what they did. And so can I be okay and sit in the room with somebody who, again, is not giving me approval or saying that, yes, you're amazing, or validation? Because again, I generally seek that. That's why I am a good student, is I want to be validated for the good work that I do. But can I still do good work regardless of whether or not someone's giving me that validation? So those are the first two that show up for me in terms of challenge. And the biggest thing for me is like looking around self-worth, and being like, I am okay as I am, and if people don't like me, that's okay. And so and I think that has really given me a strong backbone as a teacher, because there's always going to be, those of us who are teachers, there's always going to be students who don't like you. And that, I don't even bat an eye anymore. When people, I'm like, cool, like there's 100 other yoga teachers, at least in, at least in the next 5 miles, like you'll find somebody who is the right person for you. And if I'm not, that's okay. So I think that both of those examples really gave me a strong sense of being like, I'm not for everyone, and that's okay.
And last week you said, teaching is my dharma. So I wanted to bring that up this week, just in terms of community. No, your exact words were, building community is my dharma. Mm-hmm. Pardon me. Mm-hmm. So I wanted you to talk about what dharma is, first off, and your definition of community, and how you knew that this is what you wanted to do.
Mm-hmm. Dharma has a couple of different meanings, but in the context of what we're talking about here, Dharma is your life purpose, like how it is that you contribute to your community. So it's not necessarily the way that you make money, but it's the way that you're contributing to the greater good. And so you know that you're doing your Dharma when it lights you up. And I find that for me, bringing people together has always been what lights me up. And I generally love bringing people together that necessarily wouldn't come together, because again, like I said earlier, we can learn so much from each other, especially with people who aren't necessarily as similar to us as our inner circle of people. And so, yes, from a young age, I think, like, I used to throw parties and get-togethers, and I would invite everybody I knew to come to these parties, so that you would be talking to people who were in film or dance or in yoga or, who went to raves or whatever. And I found that mixing those people together always made for an interesting party. And also you learn a lot more from people that you don't necessarily choose to interact with. And then that kind of built on leading retreats and trainings in the yoga community is like the people who come to those of mine are usually a hodgepodge of people. It's a very, very mixed bag, which again, I love because we have so much to learn from each other. So my Dharma is to bring people together to hopefully create conversation and or to have a strong intention. Our intentions might be very similar, but the way that we're going about it is very different, and that's how we can learn from each other. Do you feel like you know your Dharma stuff?
I do.
Yeah, what is it?
Writing.
Okay, and how do you know?
Because it lights me up, and that's where I feel the most, and I use this term in a past discussion, grounded. For me, it's this space where I feel very at ease in my body, and things are just fluid and soft. Yeah.
Soft is a good word. Yeah, there's a softness, a surrender to it.
Surrender. Yeah, there's a softening, there's a reception in it. I don't have to push or strive for anything. And I thought, because I love teaching, I also love being part of community, but the yoga for me is not my Dharma because I don't have the same affinity through bringing people together that I do in sharing stories. That's really what I love doing. And it's not the community piece, which was a little confusing for me at first. So I wanted to put it on back at you. Who are some of your teachers that inspired you kind of in what you're doing now? Who kind of got, because you could have chose dance, you could have chose film. There were so many avenues you could have gone through to build community. So who were some of the initial people in your life that kind of tapped you into this path that you're on currently?
In terms of teaching?
Not necessarily teaching yoga, but as the quote shared, anyone in your life.
Mm-hmm. The first person that comes to mind is my social studies teacher in 9th grade.
Interesting.
And I wasn't expecting her to show up, but she just showed up in my mind. So
That's awesome.
she's meant to be here. She was probably one of the first teachers as a young adult that really inspired me as a human. I found that I was in the public school of New York City, which is kind of an intense place to go to school. And I moved there in my teenage years from Canada, from Montreal, from an art school that was very different. So to go from that to public school was kind of culture shock, to say the least. And she was the first teacher in the public school system who she was probably in her mid to late 20s. And there was an ease and a comfortableness about her that she also wasn't seeking or needed anything from us, and really worked hard to see us as beings versus like, I felt like a lot of teachers were kind of almost babysitting us. And she was big on interaction. She'd make things fun. And if you got like the answer right, she'd throw candy at you. And like, she was just, she was very, very engaging. And I loved being in her class. I loved her. Like, I thought the way that she was going about teaching was so inspiring. I haven't thought about her in a long time. I'm impressed that she just showed up for me. But in that way, though, I try to embody her as a teacher because I want to engage and I want people to be seen and encourage people to be themselves. I felt like she was really great at that. And she had a really good sense of humor towards herself and also towards us that I found very lighthearted, and it made for a more enriching experience of actually learning. And so that's the first teacher I feel like that shows up for me. And then in terms of other people in my life, I've definitely had some amazing interactions with, I used to wait tables at this fast food Buddhist vegetarian restaurant in Union Square in New York. It's super random. But I had some of my most amazing conversations when I worked the bar. Like, we didn't sell alcohol, but like the bar so that people were sitting right in front of you. Some of the most beautiful interactions that would happen over 10 minutes that would leave me inspired for the rest of the day. Whether it was like, one person I'm thinking of is like, this woman was reading a really good book that I had read, and then all of a sudden we started talking about books, and then she introduced me to another author that I'd never thought of, and then I read everything by them. And so it's sometimes those snippets of people that you meet that literally I never saw her again, or like, that's what I loved about waiting tables, is sometimes you met some of the most interesting people and then you never saw them again, but they touched you in some way, shape, or form. And so I find that some of my greatest teachers are the people that I've never seen again. And so another one that comes to mind on that one is I had this great interaction with this older gentleman, and then he gave me a deck of angel cards, which I still have. So I got them in 1998, and essentially they're cards with one word on them. And he said, I bought these for someone else, but after talking to you, I really want to give these to you. And they still inspire me. Like, I pick them every couple of days to think of words or to ponder on a concept. And yeah, I never saw him again. And I love that.
A big theme I'm getting, just listening to you talk, is inclusivity.
Mm-hmm.
From all of these stories that you've shared, is people who are very open and generous with sharing themselves or what they're doing, and especially in the teacher is the inclusiveness of accepting everyone for where they are and who they are, and there's no judgment or trying to mold someone into like, this is how I think and feel and perceive, so that's what you're gonna do.
Mm-hmm.
And I get that sense from you in class as well, but just hearing you talk, it's very inclusive.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and also there's space for the individual within the collective.
Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes what I find can happen within the collective is we get like crowd mentality, where we think that if one person does it this way, quote unquote, the leader or whoever, then we all need to do it this way. And I've definitely never come from that place, nor do I want to go to that place. It's like, so can we be an individual within the collective, right? And so then I kind of talk about this in trainings a lot when we sit in a circle, is like we all step in as individuals to create a collective, but we're still individuals within that. So how are we contributing to the group? How are we feeding the group? And that's why, again, I feel like so many of my teachers were not necessarily teachers, mm-hmm. like they didn't have the role of teacher, but they taught me so much in their own individual way.
And one thing you do that I appreciate in life and in your yoga is giving a lot of options for people. So it's not, you're not dictating, this is the way I do it, or this is the one way to do it. Here's so many different ways to tap into whatever it is you're offering.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. There is no one path.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
It's neither here nor there. There's 15 ways of going about it, and that's why we have so many different styles of meditation, so many different styles of yoga, and I think that not one of them is the one. It's just an option, because we're not all circles, we're not all pegs trying to fit into a, that saying.
Round hole.
Thank you.
Or a square peg and a round hole.
Exactly. We're all not square pegs, and there's more than one hole. So how are we moving through, or how are we going to find our truth is so different comparatively.
So that's one point around creating community in a physical space and where we're headed in terms of how yoga is now shifting more virtual. So Clara, when you were creating communities in public classes, in your intensives, in your teacher trainings, what were things that you tried to inspire to make it more a group versus just you leading? And adding to that, how is that shifting for you, creating more of a online presence to bring people together globally?
Cool. Okay. I'm going to answer the first one, and if I forget, I might ask you about the second one again. So we talked about this last week in terms of collaboration. Collaboration is way more interesting to me than a monologue. Mm-hmm. So a dialogue is way more interesting than a monologue as a teacher and also as a student. We all have something very interesting to offer to the group versus just that one person. And yes, the one person who's standing at the front of the classroom or what have you definitely has more knowledge than the other people. Let's assume that's why they're teaching whatever it is they're teaching. But I find that we are a lot more engaged as students, myself included, if we are asked questions and if through the questions we figure out the answer. Mm-hmm. right? And my father was like really big on that as a kid. I feel like I never really got a straight answer from him. It was a lot of, well, what do you think? And if you've ever been in training with me, that's usually one of the answers. Or one of the questions I always give right back to the student when they ask me a question, I say, well, what do you think? Because I'm sure like the more that you figure it out by yourself, the more embodied and the more powerful the answer is versus it just being given to you. And so so generally my teacher trainings or my classes and everything is I ask a lot of open-ended questions and I don't give the answer unless somebody asks me directly for the answer. And I find that is, it's way more interesting, and people are a lot more engaged, and then they usually walk away understanding a whole lot more, because in order to explain something, you need to figure it out. So if you get your students to explain something, then through that explanation, they process and they're like, oh, yes, whatever that is. And then if they do walk in a different directions, because sometimes you start to get them and they're like, then you just kind of like, gently go, well, maybe look over here a little bit, maybe in this direction, right?
Yeah.
And so they're able to, you can kind of like shift them over, but not too much.
So Clara, what would you say for teachers who want to bring that element into their class? How are they going to ask questions of their students?
I generally like to ask open-ended questions as my theme. So say my theme was, like we talked about last week, actually let's talk about this week. This week is community. So similar to what I did in the meditation is how I would do it in class. How we started this podcast is, thinking of the people in your life who inspire you, or the people in your life who challenge you or support you. And then maybe that would be the dedication. We would dedicate our class to these people. And so I didn't necessarily say community in any of those. I just thought of people. Or you can say, when I say the word community, what do you think of? Who are those people for you? Right? So you're literally getting them to think about their own life. And the more we get people to reflect on their own life, the more engaged they are. Versus me saying, what is community? And how would you, or another one I would ask is how would you define community, right? How do people show up in your life? So I ask a lot of questions like that, and then I don't give the answer. I just say, now think about that, bring your hands into prayer, and off we go, So, and then tie in, for those of us who are teachers, tie in those questions throughout the practice. So when they come back to Tadasana after a wave, ask the same question, or ask it a little bit differently. And then at the end of class, maybe closing with a metta meditation, like giving thanks, loving kindness to the people in our lives who support us or challenge us, So those would be the ways that I would bring in the questions.
And you don't necessarily, just hearing you talk about the way you offer in a physical space, this all transitions online. There really isn't any difference from what you're doing in a physical room with people versus what you're bringing. From my point of view, in watching what's going on the Practice with Clara website and the Facebook group and Instagram, you're not changing anything other than the room you're in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm still asking the larger questions. Though sometimes I will answer the questions. That's something that I do differently on the online. So then that way it also gives them insight into what I'm thinking about, just because we're not in an intimate room moving together. Mm-hmm. So on the Practice with Clara website, like on the membership site, I don't give the answers in the classes themselves, because that is when we do the asana practice, that is the time for self-inquiry. Yeah. But like in the newsletters or on the IG, on Instagram, right, I generally will give the answer as well, to give insight into what I'm thinking about around that. Because I find that sometimes by doing that, it allows for people to share a bit more, just because it's a bit more impersonal when we're on a social media platform than when we're together.
Yeah, I think people feel safer voicing what they want to bring once someone else comes forward. Mm-hmm. Once you get that validation, like Clara's giving her piece, then others feel safe to come through, because you don't have that intimacy, lacking the room. Mm-hmm. So do you feel the same, coming back to your comment about creating community as your Dharma, how do you feel in the shifting landscape with kind of losing the points of coming together for this practice? How is that affecting the definition of community for you? Is it?
I think the biggest takeaway I found from COVID or this challenging time that we're having or the gift of it is that we need to shift the way that we've been together. Because a lot of people are saying it's never going to be the same. And that's a really interesting idea. It's something I've been sitting with for the last couple of days. Like, I never thought about whether or not it's safe to hug somebody. I would just hug them if I wanted to hug them. Or, like the way that we have physically been together, I haven't necessarily thought about. And now I'm thinking about it all the time. And I think we will think about it for a long time before and if we ever go back to a time where we can be together. We were just watching Good Will Hunting this weekend, which is like a movie from the 90s.
So good.
And yeah, just the way that they are literally, like, I'd never looked at it before, but how they're all touching each other and like, just things you don't think about unless you're now scared to touch people. So I've been chatting with a couple of my yoga teacher friends, like, when the studios open up again, like, will we be physically adjusting people? Like, what is that going to look like? And also as teachers, how do we feel in terms of the safety of ourselves and the safety of our students? Yeah. So I've been really sitting with a lot of that. And I wonder whether or not people will not come back and like online is where people are going to go. Yeah. And so if that's the case, are we going to shift the way that we are online, or is it working right now? I feel like there's a lot of open-ended questions I'm sitting with right now. And I definitely don't know the answer to them because we're still figuring it out. And by we, I mean me, along with everybody else. What do you think?
That's a major fear I have around teaching if things do shift. I love giving hands-on assists, and I am worried that I'm going to be so in the moment, in it with my students, that I'm going to walk up to someone and go to touch them, and it's going to be inappropriate and discombobulating for me and the student. I've been thinking about that a lot, and for me, because I love being in it like that with students, whether or not this is the way I want to be teaching, because I don't feel inspired to teach online and be visual in that aspect. So how I'm holding space as a teacher, what that will look like. And there's fear in me right now talking about it. It feels very weird.
Yeah.
I'm afraid of offending someone without realizing I'm offending them, because I'm finding myself in communities in the supermarket, whatever, where I'm already feeling that energy, and it's not intentional. It's just that things are shifting so quickly, and unless you're super conscious of it, unless I'm really aware of it, I kind of lapse into, you're a step too close, and then you're offending somebody.
And there's a visceral visceral reaction that happens.
Yes.
Which I find and then it kind of jolts you back into, you're
Totally.
like, oh right, yes, this is what we're doing. I had a momentary lapse.
Yeah.
Forgot that I'm now 4 feet beside you instead of 6 feet beside you. And so, it'll be really interesting to see. But that being said, I don't know if you've seen it, but there's a ton of people social distancing outside. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a lot more people there's a lot more people socializing outside, because that's like the quote unquote safest place for us to be. And it's really kind of inspiring to see it. I will say, like, I'm seeing people bringing lawn chairs to like, a random piece of cement that has like some good sun, and you can tell the wind doesn't go there. So that's why they've all decided to show up there with their own individual snacks or their own like coffee mugs, and they're sitting together. So I think that I feel like we're realizing how important community is, and we will obviously kind of morph or, adapt to the way that we can be together. But in the context of yoga, like I was talking about it with a yoga teacher friend of mine a couple of days ago, like, are we going to keep our shoes and socks on and then take them off when we get on our mat? Or are we going to what are we going to all like put hand sanitizer on before we get on our mat? Like what's going to happen in terms of that? Everybody going to bring their own props? You know, like what's, you know, like this is such an interesting time.
And I wanted to ask you, because I learned hands-on assist from you and a few other teachers, but you specifically said in one class how we don't touch each other enough, that we don't get that physical connection with people. So now the shifting landscape of community and how we're teaching, we're going to lose that contact point. So how that affects the practice, how that affects how we're coming together, perhaps we find other ways to feel and build that intimacy, but physical touch really and a lot of people aren't getting that in their day-to-day. Speak to that a little bit.
Especially if they're living alone. I have a couple of friends who I've been talking to that it's been a bit of a darker days just because they are by themselves. And somebody told me that pet adoption is up. Like you can't adopt another pet. They've all been adopted so that people can have touch through the animals, which I found so interesting. And I'm glad that people are seeking that. I hope that they keep the animals once we go back to regular life. But I don't know in terms of the mental health. I'm so curious as to what this is going to, how this is going to affect people because of the lack of touch. And if we go forward with this kind of feeling around people, how that's going to affect us as humans. Like, are we going to become colder beings, you know, or not have, the one thing I've been thinking about is like, and I don't know if this is accurate, but I've been thinking about like, quote unquote, way back in the day, people used to actually isolate more. Like we lived further apart from each other. People didn't live, like they lived in like close quarters with their families, but that was it. And like I'm thinking rurally, like in a rural area, you know, you have a piece of property and it's just you and your family members and you're sowing the land and whatever. And you go to town like once a week to go get things. But besides that, you just see the people you see. So I feel like we're kind of going back to that time, even though at least for us, we live in an urban setting, but I feel like it's like a rural time again, which is interesting because in the silver lining part of that is like there's a lot more quiet time, a lot more downtime, a lot more there's a quietness and a slowness that's happening because of it, which I find so interesting.
And we have the internet. So now you have the choice of tapping into spaces where you feel seen and valued and feel like you can come into the like-minded group. So what are things that you are bringing into the community, Clara, to keep that essence and bringing people together and making them feel seen and heard and giving them that touchstone?
Well, one of the biggest ways that we did it is through this. We started the podcast actually as an IG Live, and the reason why we did it, Steph and I and Alejandro talked about doing it, is because we wanted to still stay connected to the community, even in our own homes. And now Steph and I are actually together, but how we were shooting it before, if you're new to us, is we were talking on our phones, right, on IG Live. But now that we can be in closer quarters with people that we know, we're doing it here. But so one of the ways we did it is through this, and then the other way was through the Practice with Clara community Facebook page, and just a way for us to share with each other images or comments and questions, and for us to still stay together, because who knows how long this is going to be for, so might as well hang out with a like-minded community of people online.
This is a great place for me to read the second part of the quote I opened with, Jack Kornfield. Our obligation and patient commitment to a teacher does not mean we must follow their way for the rest of our life. Over the long run, we must take a teacher or a practice, join a community, and then see how it serves us. So I chose this, and I love this because it's the idea of finding a teacher and stepping onto the path, but then coming into a collective, coming into a community, and then seeing what serves from there. So there's a piece of joining and gathering with others. It's not a solo process. It's not just the line between you and the person that inspires you. It's a collective. It's a group concentrated effort.
And why do you like that? Or what inspires you about it?
I feel that it's a reminder, especially in times like now where you can fall into that space of feeling isolated and alone, that you are not alone, that there are billions of people on this planet, and even though you're not seeing them every day or live close to them, someone somewhere is feeling the same way as you, which the internet gives us. Like, there are people from all over the world on your space and in the Facebook group, that it's so interesting, like you were saying before, in the restaurant, where I would have never met these people because they live in Germany or New York and I'm not there. I might never be there again. And the other piece of that is that you're not always going to be present for me. You have a family, you have a new baby. So when you've stepped out of the space for whatever reason, I mean, you took a month off to have Carmen, I can go tap into this entire network of people who have gathered because of your ideas. So it's bigger than you.
So this week's class is Shakti, which is the creative force. And we are tying it in with community because hopefully the inspiration of being around other people taps into our own creativity, our own energy, our own life force. And so if you haven't already, you can check out, we're going to start this all over again, John. Thanks so much. Okay. What were we just talking about? Community, the and the podcast, or the Facebook page. Okay. John, take 3. So cut out all of this, come back in here. Good luck with that. Maybe we can put I'll tell you about it, but maybe we can put the Shakti like picture of the class itself as we go into this, and it'll be a nice way to cut in. You'll see how it goes. You'll be creative with it. Thanks, John. Okay, here we go. This week's class that's coming out on the Practice with Clara membership site is Shakti, which is all about the creative force and kind of checking out and exploring your own beautiful body. And it's done with the Leela Vinyasa students. So I wanted to, when I was pregnant, I wasn't practicing for the classes because I had a big old belly and was doing different kinds of practices. So what I wanted to do, my vision, was actually to call on my community to come in and be your models for a lot of the classes that have been coming out in the last couple weeks. And so with this one, you'll notice that every person, there's always 3 people in these classes, are doing their own interpretation of it. And so one of the gifts of being in class, being with people, is that you see a different interpretation of whatever pose is being asked. And one thing I'd like to tie in on that is somebody had recently posted on the Practice with Clara membership site on a comment that they really enjoyed the fact that there were actually 3 people doing the class versus they'd always been practicing with me, and generally it's me just doing the class. But to see the different bodies and how they would move to the same class, so that this is the gift of community. So again, that's why it's going to be so interesting if we're not going to be together to practice. But another way of doing that is seeing 3 different bodies doing it. And so the ritual or the offering that we'd love you to bring to the table if you're a member is when you take the class this week, is for you to observe the way that they are interpreting the poses and perhaps draw some inspiration into your own practice around maybe trying one of the variations that they're doing on the class itself. We are communal beings, and we are being challenged. I think one of the greatest challenges that's happening right now is because of isolation. We're not learning from each other in the same way, but as Steph said, we have this we have the internet, which gives us a broad range of different ideas that we can tap into. So what can I learn from other people, or what have I learned from other people, would be a question I would ask. And whatever shows up from that first answer, whatever it is that showed up as I just asked you that, may that anchor your practice this week. May that be a way of remembering that we are part of a larger community of people that don't necessarily live in our home. Yeah?
Yeah. And as our physical spaces get smaller, where else can you reach out to? That has been a big learning for me, is where else am I going to seek inspiration? And if it is online, where are groups that I can join to be a part of a conversation and share in photos with whoever it is, if you have a big family, but if you don't, like Clara said earlier, where are you seeking community? Where are you tapping into that group dynamic? Because we need that.
Mm-hmm. We do need that.
Yeah.
And so the offering as you do the class this week or any other practice that you're doing is light a candle for the people that are your community, whether or not they live in the same area as you or if they live online. Light a candle at the top of your mat or in front of your meditation cushion, and quite simply take a moment or two to think about that community, to give thanks to that community, and then start your practice. Yeah. So thank you so much for joining us, as always. We'd love to hear from you. You can always go to the Practice with Clara Facebook page and post any comments either on the podcast or any questions that come up. We love questions, and Steph and I are between the two of us are on the page every other day. And if you haven't already subscribed to the podcast, we'll be doing this every week. And so yeah, check it out with us and stay connected with us as we move through this next part. Yeah. Thank you, Steph, for joining.
Thank you, Clara.
And for coming over, and we'll see you next time. Namaste. Thank you for joining us today on the podcast. Today's podcast is brought to you by the Practice with Clara app. That's mine. I've created almost 100 yoga classes for you to do at home or on the go. And they're available to you on your favorite device, including mobile, desktop, and TV. These classes include vinyasa, slow flow, hatha, restorative, yin, mantra, meditation. I also just had a baby, so I created prenatal yoga for all 4 trimesters. So head over to clararobertsoss.com/join to learn more. Or search for the Practice with Clara app at your favorite app store. There's a 7-day free trial, so no commitment. And make sure to subscribe to the podcast. We've got lots of good stuff in store for you. Until next time, namaste.